Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. He's about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from LMNO, titled Motherboard. Those of you who follow this channel in detail, you know I'm a fan of this guy. Or at least you would assume it given how many times I've covered this underground West Coast MC in detail. This will be my 5th review of one of his projects. And while for many artists that might encompass their entire career, LMNO is the sort of guy who will continue to push out albums at frankly an alarming rate. Hell, back in 2010 he released 10 albums in 1 year with a variety of different producers. At some point, I'm amazed he hasn't run out of ideas or things to say, because he's not the kind of guy to make it easy on listeners either, thanks to offbeat lyricism, high concept songs, and a vocal tone and delivery which some have described as a little bit monotonous, but also has a lot of emotive subtleties that I really think are underappreciated. But there's one thing that LMNO has not done in his years of releasing underground hip-hop albums, and that is produce an album himself. And let's make it clear, taking that additional step to be a producer is a big one. Sure, you'd think that a veteran MC would know the best beats that he would flow over, and let's be honest, I'm fairly certain LMNO could flow over anything, but production is an acquired skill, an art at its best. Most people with the right tools can structure a pretty decent beat, but seeing as someone who once tried to produce an album and failed miserably, pairing a beat with a good melody and then the production to feel cohesive and not sound like absolute ass, that's a goddamn art. And it's so much harder than it looks or sounds. As much as I've ragged on producers like DJ Mustard or Mike Will Made It or Jay Joyce, I'm not gonna deny how good and how difficult good production is. So I had a reason to be worried when I heard that LMNO was going to be producing his newest album himself. But I was intrigued, especially because the word was going that it was going to be more electronic and experimental, mostly influenced by fellow underground artist Divine One, with minimal samples and more live instrumentation. So even if this was going to be a disaster, it sounded like the sort of experimental risk that I've been wanting LMNO to take for years now. So you can bet I was going to cover this record. Did it work? Did he pull it off? Well, yeah. He really did. And as a fan of LMNO, I really shouldn't be this surprised. But for this being his first time really handling production himself with some capable assistance from Divine One, but still distinctly his, LMNO really sticks the landing with Motherboard to the point where I can easily say this is his most experimental, interesting, and hard-hitting record since After the Fact with Evidence in 2013. And while there will be some who will listen through this and say, well, it's not that different than the albums that LMNO has been pushing out for years now, devil's in the details, folks, because this record is goddamn excellent. And the best place to start? LMNO himself. And while many would describe his off-kilter, conspiratorial rasp as a bit of an acquired taste, this is the best I've heard him sound on the mic in a long time. I can't even make the criticism that he's monotone in the same way anymore, because while he's often quiet and keeps a similar tone, there's real modulation and an intensity to his delivery that you wouldn't have heard in the same way 3 years ago. And though he doesn't really sing his hooks, they have a peculiar way of really sticking with you, from the ominous mantra of Forward March to the choppy LB Legacy to the hollow warping darkness of Trollchella. I will say, again, that his flow isn't always the easiest to follow, thanks to shifting cadences and weird rhyme schemes, but the only points where it really got distracting was on the 2 interludes, Better Days and Fluke, where he feels buried so deeply in the mix it's actually a little bit hard to hear. That's the point where it got distracting, mind you, and I can still make out what he was actually saying, but I can see how some people might take some issue with it. But really, it worked because of the production, and my god, this might be the first time that LMNO really took the lead here, but it does not sound like it at all. This is the sort of production that's been lurking around the edges of LMNO's past few projects. Abrasive, more experimental, blending the organic and electronic and lo-fi dilapidated dust, and he pulls it off amazingly well. From the opening horn sample on Forward March that bleeds into the muted organ, tinkling fragments, roiling bass, live lo-fi drums, and warping electronic effects, this is a mix of so much texture and unstable grit that I'm amazed how well the melodies come through. And while previous LMNO projects have a very monochromatic production style to them, think Pre-Paranoia back in 2014, Motherboard actually has some experimental diversity that I really dug, while maintaining a cohesive foundation. The sleigh bells that bounce off the faded organ and warbling vocals on The World, the low-key booming back funk of the guitar line on LB Legacy, that thick oily swell, the low synth on Glow, with the incredibly thin popping beat that actually sounded really good, the guitar-driven melody that plays against some filthy drums and oily bass on Trollchella. Hell, even the interludes have a ton of smoked out, eerie texture that I really appreciated. Even on the extreme lo-fi of Fluke that preserves the melody and the guitar and symphonic vocals in the backing track, they sound really good. Of course, the beat that will attract the most attention is Deadification, which takes a very prominent Grateful Dead sample that later breaks into the drum circle that you would expect after a Grateful Dead show. But the production I really want to talk about is Run Dancehall. That massive alien low-end synth, the dirty drums, the minimalist bass split by shrill police whistles, the drowned out vocals on the hook, it still manages to build into a great groove that hits with some impressive impact. Really love that song. If I'm gonna find production that I like less, well, I wasn't wild about the chirping synth on Voyage, even though it was a good song, but probably my biggest gripe is on the hook of the Quickness. I really dug the xylophone scale that opens up with the hand claps and the gurgling synth that drove the alien backing tones. That chiptune on the hook, I've never heard LMNO try for that brand of theatricality. I think it could have worked a little bit better if he was a little bit more on rhythm, or the song had a little bit more space to really breathe and build. A good song, but it could have been a great song. But that is an issue with this project. It's a very quick listen with just over a half hour, and there's a lot going on in the production, and yet there's enough hooks and ideas that I could have taken another 15 minutes to really give these tracks a little bit more room to breathe. There's a lot here. I wanted to hear more. But then again, if you dig into this album thematically, this is probably LMNO's most focused and lean album in years. On previous albums, he's shown a tendency to wander into lyrical rabbit holes that can be impossible to follow. But this record really doesn't do that. It's still oblique and will take a good dozen listens to really decode, but there's more focus and succinctness in the writing that I want to highlight, more succinct statements that really work well, distilling his ideas down to their roots, to the motherboard. And that's another thing. More than most cases, LMNO is more introspective on this album, not just in his position as an indie rapper with a strong political and social bent. Run Dancehall is the best example of exploring that, but to what made him who he is as an MC. He's got his broadsides that he takes at the prison industrial complex on the Forward March and the Quickness. I particularly love the line, "Bear to arms is a right, not dare." And of course his methodical assertions placing indie wordplay over shallow and increasingly phony luxury porn fact is fiction disserviced. But what I found fascinating is how he dug into what brought him to that ideology. You get fragments of it across this album. The melancholy of a long failed relationship on better days is mostly held in nostalgia, if that, highlighting his own wilder years that drove him inward on LB Legacy, to the haunted look at festival culture on Trollchella, which shows just how much he doesn't really belong in that environment, how much of a sick, hollow jokes of image focus instead of actual on content. And initially, I was thinking that the pretty straightforward Deadification, being a tribute to the Grateful Dead, didn't really fit on this album, but it does fill an important role. Half because the echoing backing vocal implying that LMNO really isn't a hippie in the same way, but he's still accepted anyway on his trip. But interestingly, the track that probably sums up this album the most is the closer, Fluke. Almost by accident, he never found huge success, but he found his lane, forever living in the in-between. Hard-edged lyricism balanced by cryptic wordplay that might seem shallow until you decode every line and see the depth beneath it. And yeah, if you're an LMNO fan, you already knew that, but what I appreciate is how LMNO speaks to it with his own luck, with real gratitude and acknowledgement of how the only way he made anything of that Fluke chance was through hard work and acceptance of who he was as a person, that he was never gonna make it big, which come forward most on Glow as he admits he's not rap's messiah. But look, at the end of the day, this is a record that feels deceptively larger and smaller than it is. The production is bigger, heavier, more aggressive and experimental than ever before as the content turns even more introspective and inward. And yet, it finds a way to meet in the middle with tons of quotable lines, strong melodies and hooks, potent insight, and one of LMNO's best vocal performances in years. In other words, I really dug the hell out of Motherboard by LMNO, even if, once again, I know I'll be one of a very few number to really appreciate it. I'm not quite certain it's one of the best of the year thus far, but it's certainly one of LMNO's best in a long time, and that means it's a strong 8 out of 10 for me. Folks, do not dismiss this album. It might have a cult following, but with Motherboard, LMNO went to his core, and he found something definitely worthwhile. So definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yes, I know, I haven't covered Kendrick yet. Give me some time. I really want to sit with this album. There's a lot to it. I really want to make sure I get it. But beyond that, anything else you want me to cover in coming weeks, or anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.